David Suzuki, a fusion of science, spirituality, and environmentalism, David Suzuki stands as one of the most remarkable figures in modern environmental activism, not just because of his scientific contributions, but because of his profound spiritual insights that drive his work. A revered Canadian environmentalist, geneticist, author, and broadcaster, Suzuki's influence reaches far beyond the academic and activist spheres, resonating deeply with people across the globe. His work is not only rooted in scientific knowledge but is also inspired by spiritual wisdom, specifically, Buddhist principles. Can we truly save the earth without compassion and mindfulness? This is a central question that Suzuki has raised over decades of activism. As he calls on humanity to rethink its values and embrace a deeper connection to the natural world, Suzuki's advocacy for sustainable living goes far beyond the realm of facts and data. His message calls on the heart and soul, asking us to cultivate compassion for all living beings, to recognize the interconnectedness of life, and to approach the environment with the same mindfulness we might bring to our own personal spiritual journeys. Throughout this essay, we will explore not only David Suzuki's career and contributions to environmental science but also the ways in which his advocacy is shaped by Buddhist teachings. His deep belief in compassion, non-harm, mindfulness, and humility offers a unique lens through which to address today's most urgent ecological crises. David Suzuki's journey, from genetics to environmentalism. David Suzuki's career began in the world of science. With a PhD in genetics from the University of Chicago, he initially focused on the microscopic aspects of life, studying genetics and how life functions at its most fundamental levels. Yet, despite his deep engagement with genetics, Suzuki found himself increasingly drawn to broader environmental issues. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, he became increasingly alarmed by the environmental destruction he saw happening around him. Pollution, deforestation, species extinction, these were no longer abstract concepts to him, but tangible threats to life on Earth. This shift in focus wasn't merely an intellectual one, it was emotional. Even spiritual. Suzuki began to see that his work as a scientist wasn't enough. He realized that it wasn't just genes that were being destroyed, it was entire ecosystems, entire species. This realization became a turning point in his career. How could he stand by, armed with the knowledge of science, and not do something? This inner call led him to become one of the most vocal advocates for environmental protection. Suzuki's role in creating and hosting The Nature of Things on CBC television stands as one of his most influential contributions. The program, which has aired for decades, became a platform through which Suzuki could educate the public about environmental issues. Millions of viewers have learned about the dire consequences of climate change, pollution, deforestation, and species extinction through his work. But what made Suzuki's voice stand out wasn't just his ability to communicate scientific facts, it was his passion, his conviction, and his ability to touch people's hearts. Over time, Suzuki's message became increasingly philosophical and moral. He began to weave in ideas that went beyond science, speaking about the need for humanity to reconnect with nature on a spiritual level. What does it mean to truly love and care for the earth? Can we protect the environment simply by passing laws, or do we need to fundamentally change the way we see ourselves and our place in the natural world? These are questions that Suzuki has continually raised. And they reflect his deep engagement with Buddhist principles. Buddhist principles in Suzuki's environmental philosophy. At the heart of Suzuki's environmental activism is his integration of Buddhist philosophy. Buddhism, with its emphasis on compassion, mindfulness, and interconnectedness, provides a framework for understanding the world that resonates deeply with ecological thinking. Suzuki often speaks about the importance of seeing the world not as a collection of separate entities but as an interconnected whole. This idea of interdependence is central to both Buddhism and ecology. In the natural world, ecosystems function as intricate webs of life, where the health of one species affects the entire system. Similarly, in Buddhism, all beings are seen as interconnected, no one exists in isolation. Suzuki has often drawn on this idea of interconnectedness in his environmental advocacy. He believes that recognizing our dependence on the natural world is the first step toward healing the planet. "We are the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat," he has said. "If we don't take care of these things, we're not taking care of ourselves." This isn't just a scientific observation, it's a deeply spiritual one. In Suzuki's view, the damage humans are doing to the environment is a reflection of our disconnection from the earth and from each other. The Buddhist concept of dependent origination, which holds that everything arises in dependence on everything else, mirrors Suzuki's call for a holistic approach to environmental protection. He advocates for policies and actions that do not treat environmental problems in isolation but instead address the entire system in which they occur. Compassion for all living beings, the heart of Suzuki's message, compassion, or karuna, is one of the most important virtues in Buddhism, and it is central to Suzuki's environmental philosophy. In Buddhism, compassion extends not just to humans but to all living beings. Suzuki has repeatedly emphasized that environmental activism is ultimately about compassion, compassion for future generations, for animals, for plants, and for the ecosystems that sustain life. He believes that the root cause of environmental destruction is a lack of compassion, a worldview that sees nature as a resource to be exploited rather than as a living entity deserving of care and respect. Suzuki's understanding of compassion aligns with Buddhist teachings, particularly the Mahayana tradition, which focuses on the welfare of all sentient beings. He believes that we need to expand our moral circle to include not just other humans but all species. Isn't it awe-inspiring to think about extending our compassion not just to our loved ones or even our fellow humans, but to every creature on this planet? This expanded compassion, Suzuki argues, is crucial if we are to take meaningful action to combat climate change, species extinction, and other ecological crises. He has often used the example of endangered species to illustrate his point, urging people to consider the suffering of animals who are losing their habitats and the ecosystems that are being disrupted. For Suzuki, protecting the environment is not just a political or economic necessity, it is an act of kindness. Isn't it humbling to realize that every choice we make has the potential to cause harm or to alleviate suffering? Ahimsa, the practice of non-harm in environmental action, another Buddhist principle that plays a central role in Suzuki's environmental message, is ahimsa, or non-harm. In the Buddhist context, ahimsa refers to the practice of non-violence and non-harm toward all living beings. This principle is closely related to Suzuki's advocacy for reducing humanity's ecological footprint. Suzuki believes that humans have a moral obligation to minimize the harm they cause to the planet and to other species. He often critiques industrial practices and consumer habits that contribute to deforestation, pollution, and climate change, calling for a shift toward more sustainable, less harmful ways of living. Suzuki argues that humanity's current trajectory is one of violence against the earth. Industrial agriculture, the burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, and overfishing are all examples of the harm that humans inflict on the planet. He speaks about these issues not just in terms of their scientific consequences but in moral terms as well. In the Buddhist tradition, causing harm to other beings generates a negative karma, and Suzuki draws on this idea to suggest that the ecological destruction we are witnessing today is the result of humanity's collective actions. He warns that unless we change our ways and adopt a more compassionate, non-harming approach to the environment, we will face dire consequences, not just for the planet but for future generations. The power of mindfulness in environmental action, mindfulness, or sati, is another key Buddhist principle that Suzuki has integrated into his environmental activism. In the context of Buddhism, mindfulness refers to the practice of being fully present and aware of one's thoughts, actions, and their consequences. Suzuki has suggested that a lack of mindfulness is one of the root causes of environmental destruction. Modern societies, he argues, are often focused on short-term gains and immediate gratification, without considering the long-term consequences of their actions on the environment. Can you imagine how different our world might look if we practiced mindfulness in our everyday lives? Suzuki calls for a more mindful approach to living, one that takes into account the ecological impact of our choices. This includes being mindful of the resources we consume, the energy we use, and the waste we produce. By practicing mindfulness in our daily lives, we can begin to reduce our environmental impact and live in a way that is more in harmony with nature. For Suzuki, mindfulness is not just a personal practice but a collective responsibility. Governments, corporations, and individuals alike must cultivate mindfulness if we are to address the environmental crises facing the planet. The idea of mindfulness also extends to how we view time. Suzuki often speaks about the short-term thinking that dominates modern politics and economics. Decisions are made based on immediate profit or electoral cycles, without considering the long-term impacts on the environment. Suzuki urges us to adopt a more long-term, mindful perspective. What kind of world do we want to leave for future generations? How will the choices we make today affect the planet in 50 or 100 years? These are questions that mindfulness can help us answer. Humility, recognizing our place in the natural world. A key aspect of Suzuki's environmental philosophy is the need for humility. In many of his speeches and writings, Suzuki has criticized the anthropocentric worldview that places humans at the center of the universe. This worldview, he argues, is one of the primary reasons for the ecological crises we face today. Humans have, for centuries, acted as though they are separate from nature, exploiting natural resources as if the earth exists solely for their benefit. Buddhism teaches the importance of humility and recognizing one's place in the larger scheme of things. Suzuki echoes this sentiment, calling for a shift away from the idea that humans are the masters of the earth. Instead, he suggests that we must recognize our interdependence with the natural world and approach the environment with a sense of humility and respect. This humility is essential for creating a more sustainable world, as it challenges the notion that economic growth and human comfort should always take precedence over environmental health. Suzuki has often spoken about the arrogance of the human species. We have come to believe that we can control and manipulate nature for our own purposes, without regard for the consequences. This arrogance, he argues, is what has led us to the brink of ecological collapse. But Suzuki also believes that it's not too late to change. By embracing humility and recognizing that we are just one species among many, we can begin to repair the damage we've done. Suzuki's critique of consumerism and materialism. One of the most significant aspects of Suzuki's environmental message is his critique of modern consumerism and materialism. He argues that the relentless pursuit of economic growth and material wealth is one of the primary drivers of environmental degradation. Suzuki points out that many of the environmental problems we face today, climate change, deforestation, and pollution, are the result of overconsumption and the exploitation of natural resources for profit. This critique aligns with Buddhist teachings on the dangers of attachment and desire. Buddhism teaches that excessive attachment to material wealth and physical comfort leads to suffering, both for individuals and for society as a whole. Suzuki has echoed this idea, arguing that our obsession with consumer goods and economic growth is causing suffering not only for the planet but also for people. He suggests that true happiness and fulfillment come not from material wealth but from living in harmony with the earth and with each other. Suzuki's environmental philosophy is, in many ways, a call to reduce attachment to material goods and embrace a more sustainable, spiritually grounded way of life. He advocates for a shift away from the consumerist mindset that dominates modern society, toward a more mindful and compassionate approach to living. Can we imagine a world where happiness is not measured by how much we consume but by how much we give back to the earth? A global call to action. David Suzuki's environmental message is not just aimed at individuals, it is a call to action for governments, corporations, and institutions around the world. He believes that systemic change is necessary to address the environmental crises facing the planet. And he has been a vocal advocate for policies that promote sustainability, conservation, and renewable energy. Suzuki has supported initiatives such as reducing carbon emissions, protecting biodiversity, and preserving critical habitats like forests and wetlands. These initiatives reflect a compassionate approach to the environment, one that recognizes the interconnectedness of all life and the need to protect the earth for future generations. Suzuki's calls for action are deeply informed by his belief in the power of collective responsibility. He has often spoken of the need for a global shift in consciousness, where humans begin to see themselves not as separate from nature but as part of it. This shift, he argues, is essential for creating a sustainable future. It is not enough to rely on technology or policy alone. We must also change our values and adopt a more compassionate, mindful approach to living. Isn't it inspiring to think that by coming together, we can make a difference on a global scale? Conclusion: integrating Buddhist wisdom into environmental action. David Suzuki's work as an environmentalist is not just a scientific endeavor, it is a deeply moral and spiritual one. Drawing on both his scientific background and Buddhist principles, Suzuki has created a powerful framework for understanding and addressing the environmental crises of our time. His emphasis on compassion, non-harm, mindfulness, and humility offers a holistic approach to environmentalism, one that calls for both individual and collective action. In a world facing unprecedented environmental challenges, Suzuki's message is more important than ever. He reminds us that the health of the planet is intimately connected to our own well-being and that by acting with compassion and mindfulness, we can create a more sustainable and just world for future generations. His work stands as a testament to the power of integrating scientific knowledge with spiritual wisdom to address the most pressing issues of our time. Can we rise to the challenge? Will we embrace compassion, mindfulness, and humility in our efforts to protect the earth? These are the questions that David Suzuki leaves us with, and the answers will determine the future of our planet.